Okay, let's continue on with this. So Darwin, evolution, changing species over time. We know that he was influenced not only by his findings, his observations that he saw, by the findings of Hutton and Lyell with the movement of land with volcanic activity. But he was also influenced by Malthus, and Malthus was a scientist that focused on human interactions. Okay, and some of the things that Malthus observed were that humans have more children that can survive. There are built-in population checks, which means there are things that help limit the size of a population, like disease that can move through a population, or famine, okay, or even war. So there are these built-in population checks. So Darwin used these ideas as well, okay, that helped him form his theory of natural selection. And what natural selection is, it's just the survival of the fittest. Okay, so all of these other scientists that did their observations and studies, and that all had influences on his thinking, helped tie into the evidence that he found through his observations when he went through South America and compared the animals there to Africa, and especially in the Galapagos, that all these animals are only going to be able to survive if they're fit for that environment. So this is how he came up with natural selection. All right, once he finished, it took him about 20 years to actually publish his works, and one of the reasons why it took him so long to publish his findings was the idea or the beliefs within the culture in England during that time. People didn't want to hear about the findings that he found. They wanted to think that each individual creature was built specifically that way and it can never change. And so it took him about 20 years before he was able to publish his findings and not be ridiculed by his peers or by the public. So his book, Origin of the Species, he lays this out. He lays out his findings and what he saw, and uses this other information from the other scientists to tie it all together about natural selection and what it is and how it works. All right, so let's kind of get into this idea of natural selection. So there's 5 basic parts that he found. Okay, the first part is all species have genetic variation. And we know this to be true today. Okay, think about our eye colors, for example. We know that we have different alleles for eye color. We have different alleles for everything. We get half of them from mom and half of them from dad. That helps increase genetic variation. Okay, we know that different races mix, different cultures mix, so different genetic traits are going to mix as well. The second concept of natural selection was that organisms produce more offspring than they can survive, and he took this from Malthus and Malthus's studies on human population. He took this and he actually observed other animal populations, and he found the same thing, that more offspring will be produced than what can survive. The reason being is because the more offspring that is produced, the higher probability that you will have offspring with the right traits be able to make it through all of those checks that keep a population from getting too big, and be able to make it and reproduce and pass on those traits to the next generation. So it increases that probability. The third concept of natural selection, there's going to be competition or a struggle to survive because of this increased amount of organisms that are produced. Okay, so competition is going to increase. Competition for things that are limiting factors, and we're going to get into limiting factors a little bit later, but things that can limit the size of a population, like the amount of food available, or the amount of water available, the amount of mates available, those types of things. Other limiting factors that are not directly related to like water and food, but are going to happen no matter where you're at, are going to be like natural limiting factors, like wildfires and storms and droughts, weather occurrences. Those can also be limiting factors that help place checks on a population, which is why there are going to be more offspring produced than can survive. So that way there's going to be at least one or two of those offspring that have the right genetic makeup that can survive within that environment to be able to move on, grow to maturity, and reproduce and pass on those genes to the next generation. The fourth concept, survival of the fittest. Now what this means is that think about the sea turtle example that was on the very first concept, or the second concept. If you have 1,000 sea turtles born within a lifetime of a mommy sea turtle, okay, out of all of those sea turtles that are born, those baby sea turtles, there might only be one or two that actually have the right gene makeup, okay, because of however the genotype formed for them, the right gene makeup to be able to survive within that environment. So survival of the fittest. They have the for example, the physical ability to make it in the treacherous ocean that they were born right beside. They have the ability to evade predators until they can get big enough. They have the ability to hunt for their prey. Their main prey for the sea turtle example would be like jellyfish. So they have the right genes to allow them to survive in that environment. That's survival of the fittest. If they don't have them, they're going to die off. Okay, so whoever can make it, whichever offspring can make it to maturity and reproduce and then pass on their best traits to the next generation, are the ones that are needed for that particular environment. So that's survival of the fittest. And then the last part of natural selection is this idea with descent with modification, which means, I know it talks about a common ancestral species, but if you take that out of it, if you think about every separate species on the planet of animals, whether it be humans or sea turtles or whatever species of animal you're looking at, those that have the genes that won't let them survive within the environment, won't let them be able to find food or be able to attract mates or be able to win a territory for space, or be able to fight over and win for water, or be smart enough to find these things that are competed for. If they don't have the traits to be able to allow them to do that, they're going to die. They're not going to survive. So the only ones that are going to be able to survive are going to be the ones that have those traits, that are able to find food, or to hide from their prey, or to compete for water source, or to compete and attract mates. Okay, so this descent with modification. The ones that have it, that have the right genes, are going to be able to pass those right genes on to future generations. The ones that don't have the right genes, those genes are going to get weeded out, and those organisms are going to die off. Okay, so natural selection, survival of the fittest, that's the overall concept of it. Now, how these organisms have the ability to change over time to be able to fit in with the changes in their environment are due to these adaptations that they get. The genes that they get from the mom or the dad that has a specific trait that allows them to survive in that specific area, that's what's going to give them that edge. So adaptations are going to be key. Okay, remember there's always variations to genes. Now, whichever variations show up that can survive within a particular environment due to those different environmental changes that occur, those adaptations are what's going to promote the survival of that species. Now, this little blurb that popped up, okay, there's not going to be a random mutation. Say, for example, let's look at our turtle species. Okay, turtles survive in salt water. Well, there's not going to be something that say something were to happen and the salt concentration in the ocean dropped by 50%. Turtles would not be able to just mutate and survive in that. There would have to be a gene somewhere in the genotype of all the sea turtles that would allow a certain number of those sea turtles to be able to survive in less concentration of salt in the water. And then that way, that particular gene would get passed on because those individuals would live while the ones that didn't have that gene would die. Okay, so there wouldn't be just some random bang mutation to allow them to survive. There would have to be some underlying allele or gene within a population that had the right characteristic to allow the survival if there was a change to occur. If there's not, extinction. Okay, they can't adapt. They don't have those right genes within the gene pool of that species to be able to make it into in a changing environment. They can't adapt. They're going to die. That's extinction. Okay, animals have gone extinct throughout the years for these reasons. Whether there was some type of environmental disaster and they didn't have the right genes to be able to survive and pass those genes on, then they went extinct. Now there was also other, they think, like major disasters that caused mass extinction, but as far as you take out the mass extinction part and you look at normal extinction due to competition, this is what you're looking at. Okay, a lot of scientists think that we're experiencing, though this planet right now is experiencing a mass extinction, which means there are thousands of species that are threatened to the brink of going extinct due to habitat loss, due to the destruction of their food source, of their shelter, of their living space. Okay? Now this isn't necessarily a natural disaster as much as a man-made disaster. And that's a totally different topic, but almost every species that is on the threatened list, the world's threatened list, the species that are close to extinction, they're there because of human interaction. They're there because the human population has taken away their food source or taken away their habitat, and they don't have the genes built into them to survive that big of a change that quickly. Okay, so if you think about this, if you plan on having kids when you get older, and we keep going at the rate we're growing, when your kids get old enough, they're not going to get to see these animals that you've seen. Or maybe you haven't seen these animals. The only place you can see these animals are at a zoo. I'll be straightforward with you. What is a zoo? A zoo is a place people make money to see animals that aren't no longer abundant in the wild. Some of them maybe were injured and that's how they made it to the zoo. That's what you hope is the reason. You hope they weren't just taken from their habitat for the purpose of human pleasure. Okay? But most of these animals that are threatened or endangered, they're not going to be around. They might not even be around in zoos anymore for you to go, for your grandchildren to go see, if our rate of this mass extinction period continues to go as it is. Animals are dying 1,000 times faster than they died before humans got involved. So they're going extinct 1,000 times quicker. There's only a third of the rainforest left compared to before we moved into the rainforest, into the Amazon rainforest, and started cutting down trees, going through deforestation, turning the land into croplands, taking away that habitat from those native animals. So by the time you're an adult and you have kids, maybe you have the money to go see that stuff, but there might not even be a rainforest left. So those are implications that we're looking at. That's something that evolution is causing. We are causing this planet to evolve.